The U.S. military has over 3,000 different jobs. One of them is bomb disposal, an 80-pound suit and a long walk toward something built to kill you. Another one is playing the trumpet. Both people get the same dog tags. By the end of this video, you'll understand the entire hidden architecture of American military jobs, and which one has a washout rate so brutal that 8 out of every 10 people who attempt it will fail. The United States military isn't one organization. It's 6 separate branches: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and the newest Space Force, each with its own culture, its own uniform, and critically, its own system for classifying jobs. Some call them MOS. Some call them ratings. Some call them AFSCs. Different names, same core idea. Every single person in uniform, from a 4-star general to a brand new private, has a job code that defines exactly what they do. There are more than 3,000 of these codes across the entire force. This is the map of all of them. Before we get into the jobs themselves, you need to understand the language because every branch speaks a different dialect of the same idea. In the Army and the Marine Corps, a job is called an MOS, Military Occupational Specialty. It's a code, usually a mix of numbers and letters, like 11B for infantryman or 68W for a combat medic. That code isn't random. Each digit and letter means something specific: the career field, the specialty within that field, the skill level. An Army recruiter can look at 11B and instantly know that soldier trains to engage and defeat enemy ground forces with rifles and anti-armor weapons. The Navy and Coast Guard don't use MOS. They use ratings, job titles like bosun's mate or machinist's mate, paired with an abbreviation like BM or MM. A sailor's rate combines their rating with their pay grade, so a senior bosun's mate might be a BM1, a petty officer first class. The Air Force uses something called an AFSC, Air Force Specialty Code, a 5-character alphanumeric string. The first number tells you the career group. A 3 skill level suffix means apprentice. A 9 means superintendent, the top of that career field. It looks intimidating, but it's basically a resume compressed into 5 characters. And the newest branch, Space Force, stood up in December 2019, inherited most of its personnel and job structure from the Air Force, and is still actively building out its own dedicated codes, Space Force Specialty Codes, or SFSCs, as the branch matures. Here's the retention hook for this video. Every single one of these systems, no matter how different they look on paper, is answering the exact same question. What happens if this person doesn't come home from work today? Who's trained to do their job tomorrow? That's the entire reason this system of thousands of codes exists. Now let's break down exactly what's inside it, branch by branch, starting with the biggest one. The U.S. Army is the largest branch in the American military, and its job list reflects that scale. As of 2026, the Army maintains well over 140 active enlisted MOS codes, organized into what are called career management fields, or CMFs. Everyone pictures the infantry when they think Army. 11B, the riflemen who close with and destroy the enemy on the ground, and 11C, who operate mortars and indirect fire weapons in support of them. But infantry only scratches the surface. There's the entire signal corps, responsible for keeping secure communication running between a soldier on the ground, a helicopter overhead, and commanders miles away. Without it, modern combat simply doesn't function. There's military intelligence, gathering and translating enemy communications. There's 09L, an interpreter and translator MOS specifically built around language skills that can be the difference between a peaceful negotiation and a firefight. Then there's the machinery most people never think about. Combat engineers who use explosives and heavy equipment to build roads, bridges, and airfields, sometimes under fire, sometimes just to keep an entire base functioning. Army divers, MOS-00B, who perform reconnaissance, demolition, and salvage work underwater, choosing between scuba and deep-sea diving depending on the mission. Ammunition specialists managing the Army's entire stockpile of ordnance. Combat electronic missile system repairers, MOS-94A. Technicians so specialized they maintain guided missile systems that most soldiers will never even touch. And then there's the quiet backbone of the whole operation. The Quartermaster Corps, providing food, water, fuel, and repair parts to every soldier downrange, and the paralegal specialists, MOS-27D, who keep the Army's legal system running even in a war zone. Quick recap before we move on. The Army alone runs a job market bigger than most mid-sized companies, spanning combat, medicine, law, engineering, and logistics, and we've only covered one branch. The Navy does things completely differently, and it starts with the fact that they refuse to even call their jobs jobs. Ask a sailor what their MOS is, and you'll get a correction, not an answer. The Navy calls its enlisted jobs ratings, and as of 2026, the fleet maintains several dozen active ratings spanning deck operations, engineering, aviation, cryptology, intelligence, medical, and supply. Start on deck. The bosun's mate BM is one of the oldest ratings in naval history, responsible for a ship's exterior maintenance, deck operations, and small boat handling. It's the rating that built the modern Navy long before anyone thought about nuclear reactors. Speaking of which, nuclear power might be the single most technically demanding job field the Navy runs. Nuclear-trained machinists, mates, MMNs, operate and maintain the reactors that power aircraft carriers and submarines, some of the most complex machines humans have ever built, and by 2026 pay charts, a senior nuclear enlisted sailor can out-earn many officers thanks to specialized nuclear incentive pay. Then there's the Navy diver performing underwater rescue, ship and submarine repair and salvage, one of the physically toughest ratings in the entire fleet. Not every Navy job is designed around danger, though. There's the Navy musician, composing and performing at ceremonies, parades, and services. There's the Navy counselor, guiding sailors through career decisions. There's the yeoman, YN, running the Navy's administrative machinery, travel coordination, correspondence, official reports, the paperwork that quietly keeps a fleet of hundreds of thousands of people organized. And then there's naval special warfare, the community that includes the SEALs, which we'll come back to later in this video, because it deserves its own spotlight. Here's your retention hook. The Navy and the Coast Guard actually share several rating names, like bosun's mate and machinist's mate. But don't let the shared vocabulary fool you, because the Coast Guard's entire mission and its entire job structure is built around something completely different from blue water naval warfare. We'll get there. First, let's go up in the air. The Air Force runs on roughly 135 enlisted AFSCs, spread across 9 broad categories: operations, logistics, support, medical, professional fields like chaplain and legal, contracting and financial, special investigations, special duty assignments, and special reporting identifiers. Operations covers the majority of what people picture when they think Air Force. The 1A career field, aircrew operations, includes the loadmasters, in-flight refueling specialists, and flight engineers who keep aircraft functioning mid-mission, resolving problems that could otherwise ground or crash a plane. But the Air Force's identity in the modern era is increasingly digital. Cyber warfare and IT specialties have exploded in importance. Officer AFSCs now include roles like 17X, Cyber Operations Officer, defending, and when authorized, disrupting networks that an entire war can hinge on. There's also an entire medical wing of AFSCs mirroring a civilian hospital, nurses, medical technicians, physical therapists, and health services administrators, all wearing the same uniform as fighter pilots. And then there's special warfare, the Air Force's most physically extreme career fields, including combat control, tactical air control party, special reconnaissance, and the one we're building toward for the end of this video, pararescue. Recap and bridge, 3 branches down: Army, Navy, Air Force, and already we've covered infantry, nuclear reactors, and cyber warfare. But there are still 3 more branches to go, and the next one runs almost entirely on a single word: Marine. The Marine Corps does something no other branch does. Every single Marine, regardless of their eventual job, is trained first and foremost as a rifleman. The Corps' unofficial creed, "Every Marine a rifleman," isn't just tradition. It's baked directly into the culture around their job codes. Marine Corps jobs are organized into what's called occupational fields, or OCCFLDS, using MOS codes that range roughly from 0100 to 8999. The 03XX field is infantry, the heart of the Corps' identity. The 06XX field covers communications. The 18XX field covers reconnaissance, the eyes and ears of Marine operations, often working deep in contested territory ahead of the main force. Unlike the Army, the Marine Corps' MOS system doesn't distinguish between officers and enlisted the same way. Everyone within a field shares that field's core identity, whether they're a brand new private or a senior officer commanding hundreds. The Marine Corps also runs its own version of the Army's combat engineers, its own aviation wing supporting Marine air power, and its own EOD techs, Marine Corps MOS 2336, who train at the same brutal joint EOD school we'll cover later in this video, wearing an 80-pound bomb suit into situations most people would run away from. Retention hook. Marine pride in their MOS runs so deep that veterans will introduce themselves by their job code decades after leaving the Corps. But while the Marines built an identity around the rifle, the next branch on this list built its entire identity around something the other 5 branches barely touch: rescuing people, not fighting them. The Coast Guard is the smallest of the 6 armed services, and it's the only one that operates under the Department of Homeland Security during peacetime rather than the Department of Defense, though it can be transferred under Navy command during wartime. Its job structure mirrors the Navy's rating system, but on a much smaller scale, roughly 24 active ratings, built entirely around cutter operations, maritime law enforcement, and search and rescue. That last category is where the Coast Guard produces one of the most genuinely dangerous jobs in the entire American military, and almost nobody outside the service has ever heard of it: the Aviation Survival Technician, or AST, the Coast Guard's dedicated helicopter rescue swimmer rating. Unlike the Navy, where rescue swimming is a duty added on top of an existing rating, the Coast Guard built rescue swimming into its own standalone job. ASTs jump from helicopters into open ocean during hurricanes and storms specifically to save people other rescuers can't reach. Capsized boats, sinking fishing vessels, swimmers being pulled out to sea. It is, by design, one of the only jobs in the entire U.S. military built around running directly into danger to save civilians who have absolutely nothing to do with the military at all. The Coast Guard also runs the Bosun's Mate rating, sharing its name and abbreviation with the Navy's version, plus its own law enforcement-focused ratings that give Coast Guard personnel actual federal police authority, boarding, inspecting, and if necessary, arresting people on the water, something no other branch's job codes are built to do. Let's pause and take stock of where we are. Army, the biggest, most sprawling job market in the military. Navy, ratings built around a fleet that never stops moving, from nuclear reactors to musicians. Air Force, a career field list split almost evenly between pilots and programmers. Marine Corps, every job filtered through the identity of the rifleman. Coast Guard, the smallest branch quietly running some of the most genuinely selfless rescue work in the entire U.S. military. Now, for the 6th and newest branch, one that didn't even exist before most Gen Z viewers of this video were teenagers. The United States Space Force was officially established on December 20, 2019, making it, by a wide margin, the youngest branch of the U.S. military. Because it was carved directly out of existing Air Force space units, it inherited most of its early personnel structure, including modified Air Force specialty codes, rather than starting completely from scratch. Space Force members are called Guardians, and their job codes are gradually being converted into dedicated Space Force specialty codes, or SFSCs, as the branch continues to mature its own identity separate from the Air Force. Roles like 13S, Space Operations Officer, focus on leading missions related to satellite operations, space domain awareness, and orbital warfare, a genuinely new category of military job that simply did not exist as its own branch-level specialty a decade ago. Because Space Force is small, currently the smallest branch by personnel, its job catalog is also the narrowest, concentrated heavily around cyber operations, satellite communications, missile warning systems, and intelligence, rather than the sprawling logistics and combat arms structure you see in the Army or Marine Corps. But make no mistake, as global competition in orbit intensifies, this branch's job codes are likely to be some of the fastest growing in the entire U.S. military over the next decade. That's all 6 branches covered at the broad strokes level. But numbers and categories only tell you so much. Some of the strangest, most specific jobs in the entire U.S. military are hiding inside those categories, and we're about to rapid-fire through some of them. Let's move fast through some of the specialties that surprise people the most, because the military isn't just riflemen and pilots. First, musicians. Every branch runs its own professional military band system. The Navy musician rating, the Army's musician MOS, the Marine Corps' musician field. These are fully trained performers who play everything from ceremonial funerals to full concert tours, some holding advanced music degrees before they ever enlisted. Second, mortuary affairs. The Army's mortuary affairs specialist, MOS 92M, is responsible for the search, recovery, identification, and preparation of fallen service members for return to their families. It's one of the most emotionally demanding jobs in the entire military, and one almost nobody outside the Army has ever heard of. Third, chaplains. Every branch employs ordained religious leaders across multiple faiths, embedded directly with combat units, providing spiritual counsel in some of the most stressful environments imaginable, and doing it unarmed, by tradition and by military code. Fourth, military working dog handlers. Across the Army, Air Force, and Marine Corps, specially trained handlers partner with dogs trained to detect explosives, drugs, and threats, forming bonds so close that many handlers later formally adopt their working dogs after retirement. Fifth, JAG officers, the military's own lawyers, prosecuting and defending service members in courts-martial, negotiating international law during deployments, and providing legal counsel that can shape entire military operations. Here's the retention hook. Every single one of these jobs earns the exact same beret, the exact same benefits eligibility, and salutes the exact same flag as an infantry rifleman. The military doesn't just run on people who fight. It runs on an entire hidden economy of specialists, and that economy is what actually keeps the fighting force alive long enough to fight. Here's something recruiters don't advertise enough. The majority of people in the U.S. military never fire a weapon in combat. The force runs on a massive support machine, and three fields anchor almost all of it: medicine, logistics, and intelligence. Medicine starts with the combat medic, Army MOS 68W, officially titled healthcare specialist. These are the soldiers trained to provide emergency trauma care under fire, often the single most important person on a battlefield in the first 60 seconds after someone is wounded. Every branch has its equivalent. The Navy's hospital corpsman famously serves embedded with Marine infantry units, meaning Navy medical personnel take fire alongside Marine riflemen despite technically belonging to a different branch entirely. Logistics is less glamorous and arguably more essential. Nothing moves in the U.S. military without transportation specialists managing vehicles across air, land, sea, and rail, and without quartermaster and supply personnel tracking food, fuel, ammunition, and repair parts across entire theaters of operation. An army famously doesn't march on empty stomachs, and the entire supply chain making sure that never happens runs through these job codes. And then there's intelligence, signals intelligence, human intelligence, imagery analysis, the specialists who translate raw data and human sources into the decisions that commanders actually act on. In the Air Force, cyber operations increasingly blur directly into this world, defending, and sometimes penetrating networks that can shape a conflict before a single shot is fired. Quick bridge. We've now covered the entire visible structure of the U.S. military job system. 6 branches, thousands of codes, from riflemen to musicians to nuclear reactor operators. But we've been saving the most intense category for last. Because buried inside all 6 of these branches are a small handful of jobs specifically designed to break most of the people who attempt them, and we're about to walk through the 2 most extreme examples in the entire U.S. military. Army Special Forces, the Green Berets MOS 18 series, led by Special Forces officers coded 18A, specialize in unconventional warfare, training and leading foreign military and guerrilla forces, operating for extended periods with minimal support, deep inside contested or hostile territory. Their unofficial motto, De oppresso liber, roughly translates to free the oppressed. And their entire training pipeline is built around producing soldiers who can function as trainers, diplomats, and combat leaders simultaneously, often while embedded with foreign forces who don't speak English. The Navy's equivalent isn't really an equivalent at all. It's an entirely different philosophy. Navy SEALs, part of Naval Special Warfare, run through what's widely considered one of the most physically brutal selection courses on the planet, Basic Underwater Demolition/SEAL Training, universally known by its nickname BUD/S. The centerpiece of that course is Hell Week, 5.5 days of continuous training with minimal sleep, constant cold water exposure, and physical demands specifically engineered to push candidates to quit voluntarily, rather than be failed on a test. By 2026 pay charts, enlisted SEALs can earn significant special duty and jump pay stacked on top of standard pay, but almost every SEAL and Green Beret candidate you ask will tell you the same thing. Nobody does this job for the money. Retention hook. As brutal as both of these pipelines are, they're not actually the hardest training pipelines in the entire U.S. military by attrition rate. Not even close. We're about to cover the 2 jobs that hold that record, and one of them doesn't even involve fighting anyone at all. Explosive Ordnance Disposal (EOD) exists across the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps, and it might be the single most technically demanding job in the entire U.S. military. EOD technicians locate, identify, render safe, and dispose of everything from unexploded artillery shells to homemade improvised explosive devices to, in extreme cases, chemical or nuclear ordnance components. Forget what television shows you. This isn't a job where someone calmly decides between a red wire and a blue wire. It's a highly technical, deeply scientific process involving advanced robotics, X-ray imaging, and precise chemical analysis. And when a robot can't safely reach the device or conditions demand a human hand, an EOD technician walks out there personally, alone, in an 80-pound bomb suit, towards something specifically engineered to kill anyone who gets close to it. In the community, that walk out to the device while every other unit pulls back to a safe distance is known simply as the long walk. The training pipeline reflects the stakes. After basic training, EOD candidates go through dive school and parachute school before entering the Joint EOD School at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, a roughly 9-month, 36-week course covering explosive theory, render-safe procedures, and nuclear, biological, and chemical munitions. The attrition rate is described by nearly every source covering the field as one of the highest in the entire U.S. military, and multiple EOD veterans describe that difficulty as a point of pride rather than a flaw in the system, because the alternative is putting someone underqualified in front of a live bomb. That's about as intense as a military job gets while still centering on destruction. But the single hardest training pipeline in the entire U.S. military, by both length and failure rate, isn't built around destroying anything at all. It's built around saving people nobody else can reach. And that's exactly where we're ending this video. Of every job across all 6 branches of the United States military, every combat arms MOS, every SEAL and Green Beret pipeline, every EOD technician who's ever taken the long walk toward a live device, one job holds the record for the longest and most brutal training pipeline of them all: Air Force Pararescue. The PJs. Their motto is 4 words: that others may live. It's not a slogan. It's the literal design principle of the entire job. Pararescuemen exist specifically to recover isolated, injured, or captured personnel from environments that are too hostile, too remote, or too dangerous for anyone else to reach. Free-falling into contested territory, diving into open ocean, fighting their way to a downed pilot or a wounded operator, and then providing advanced trauma medicine on the spot, often while still under fire. Becoming a PJ takes roughly 2 full years, and it is, by nearly every account from the career field itself, the longest enlisted training pipeline in the entire U.S. military. It starts with basic training, then moves into a brutal special warfare candidate course involving relentless running, rucking, and swimming specifically designed to identify who can't handle sustained physical suffering. From there, candidates move through Army Airborne School for static line parachuting, a combat diver course routinely described as one of the hardest individual courses in the entire U.S. military, the military freefall course for high-altitude skydiving, and SEER School, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, training built around what happens if a service member is captured behind enemy lines. Then comes a 39-week block of advanced medical training, because every PJ graduates as a certified paramedic capable of performing trauma medicine in the field that rivals what you'd get in a civilian emergency room, except delivered in a helicopter, underwater, or on the side of a mountain. The pipeline finishes with a roughly 22-week pararescue apprentice course, where candidates have to prove every single skill they've built over 2 years works together, under pressure, without hesitation. Here's the number that should genuinely stop you. Sources across the career field cite attrition rates ranging from roughly 80% up to as high as 95%. That means somewhere between 8 and almost 10 out of every 10 candidates who attempt to become a pararescueman will not make it. Air Force Pararescue is, right now, an extremely small community, only around 500 PJs serving at any given time across the entire United States Air Force. And unlike nearly every other high-attrition pipeline on this list, the entire point of surviving it isn't learning to kill more efficiently. It's earning the ability to walk or dive or freefall into the worst possible situation on Earth, specifically to bring somebody else home alive. That's the actual ceiling of what a military job can be in the United States Armed Forces. An entire 2-year gauntlet, built to break almost everyone who attempts it, in service of a forward promise to total strangers they haven't even met yet. From a musician playing taps at a funeral to a PJ free-falling into hostile territory to save someone they've never met, every single job in this video shares one uniform, one flag, and one set of benefits: but almost nothing else. That's the real story hiding inside 3,000 job codes. The US military isn't one job. It's an entire hidden civilization, built to run itself, heal itself, and, when absolutely necessary, defend itself, all at the same time. If an 80 to 95% washout rate for pararescue blew your mind as much as it did mine, you need to see our next video. The hardest military selection courses ranked, explained. Drop a comment and tell me, which job on this list surprised you the most, the Coast Guard rescue swimmers or the Army's mortuary affairs specialists? I read every single one. See you in the next video.